Alrighty guys, I am really excited about today because I'm going to be trying something on the Turbo 8.1 Silverado that I've kind of been hesitant to do because I'm not entirely sure if the engine is going to be able to hold up to it or not. We're going to be raising the boost, hopefully into the double digits. My name's LT, and on this channel we build custom and high performance trucks, and I show you guys every step along the way, all the technical aspects, and of course we do some racing because that's the whole point of building a fast truck, is getting it out on the track and having some fun with it. Now, if that content appeals to you, please help me out and hit that subscribe button because we are trying to reach 100,000 subs by the end of this year, and I will need your help to make that happen, so please consider subscribing. Now, Uglytruck is a 2000 Silverado, and last year I swapped in an 8.1 big block, and then over last winter we turbocharged it. It's got a S480 turbo, and so far we've been running 7 pounds of boost. I started out at 5 just on spring pressure. I added a boost controller and I turned it up to 7 PSI, and so far it's been doing pretty good at that, but I will say I have been fairly conservative in my tune-up because the 8.1s have a reputation for not being the strongest engine in the world. But today we're going to turn up the boost and see what happens. Now, even though we are working on an 8.1 Silverado, the steps that we're going to be talking about today are somewhat universal. The tech can be applied to pretty much any turbo vehicle. We're going to talk about what you physically have to do to raise the boost, which means we're discussing things like wastegates and boost controllers. And not only that, I'm going to tell you some of the things that you need to look out for in tuning to make sure that the engine will be happy at a higher boost level. And then we'll talk about just the physical limit of parts, you know, how much something will be able to hold up to. And of course, at the end, we're going to get out on the road and see how this thing feels at 10 or 11 or 12 PSI or however much we can get out of it. So, the very first thing we need to talk about is how we are physically going to increase the boost. So just really basic and quick Turbo 101. Turbo is driven by exhaust energy. There's a turbine housing, compressor housing that sucks in fresh air, intercooler up front, blow-off valve to relieve pressure when the throttle plate suddenly closes, and finally, the most important part of today's discussion anyway, is a wastegate. Now, the job of a wastegate is to regulate how much exhaust actually goes into the turbine to make the turbo spin and produce boost, or how much bypasses the turbine and just kind of bleeds off into the exhaust. Now, the wastegate in this case, and most cases, is controlled by a combination of a spring and boost pressure. So there's a small spring kind of right here, there's a diaphragm on the bottom, and there is boost pressure. This goes right to the compressor cover, or just a little bit below it down there. So however much boost the turbo is making is fed through this line, and it actually helps open up the wastegate. And whenever the wastegate opens up, boost pressure goes down. Now, in the middle of this line is a boost controller. That's sort of a bleed-off regulator. And as you open this to increase boost, it sends less pressure to the bottom of the wastegate, which means the spring can hold it shut a little bit longer. Now, some boost controllers will work on the top side of the gate by applying pressure, but it essentially does the same thing. It just regulates how much pressure goes into the spring to keep the thing closed or open. Now, right now I have a 5 PSI spring, and that's combined with a boost controller that's all the way maxed out. And whenever I have it all the way maxed out, we get somewhere around 7 to 8 PSI of boost, and it holds pretty steady throughout the RPM range. But we're kind of at the limits of the spring because I have the boost controller maxed all the way out. So in order to raise the boost level further, we need to physically put more pressure on that wastegate with a different spring. All right, you know what they say about making assumptions, right? Well, I feel really dumb right now because I had incorrectly assumed that a TurboSmart 60mm gate would have a spring that interchanges with the VS Racing 60mm. But as it turns out, I was wrong, and the springs do not interchange. So the problem here is this spring, as you can see, is smaller in diameter than the small spring from the VS Racing. This is the big spring from the VS Racing. And there's this little tapered seat right here. The spring doesn't go all the way down. And then on the bottom side of the cover, there's that little register right there that'll keep the spring centered. Well, the original spring sits nicely in there, nicely centered, where this one will not. So rather than trying to run this one, I mean, I could install the cover and it would be a spring, but it wouldn't stay centered. So I've actually ordered the correct spring now. And as it turns out, it's not a TurboSmart, it's a Tial. That's right, a Tial V60 has springs that'll interchange, and I've actually verified it this time with some measurements. So I ordered a Tial big green spring from Jags, and it's like a $25 spring, but I paid another 35 bucks to overnight it. So it'll be here for you guys in just a few moments, but it'll be here for me tomorrow, and it's the big green spring, and I think it's rated at like, I think it was 8.6 pounds. The shipping cutoff was like 5 o'clock, and it's now 450, so I wanted to make sure that I got one on the way. So yeah, about 8.5 pounds is what it'll run at. Now, I did consider for just a second running only this large outer spring, but I did just a quick like squish test, and this one is like way stiffer than this one by a factor of probably 2 to 3. So I think if I would stick this one in, it would probably be like 15 to 20 pounds, if not a little bit more. So I'm not gonna risk that. We'll stick with the 8.1, and it should be here tomorrow, and hopefully, I mean, I did take some measurements. They had a chart and they said exactly how big it is and it should fit. So we'll find out. So it's the very next day, and just like they said it would, we have ourselves a new wastegate spring ready to go in. But I had a little bit of a panic attack for a second just because I saw the packaging and it says 0.9 bar and 13.05 PSI on the back of the packaging. And that is totally not what I ordered. But on the other side, it said large green spring, which is what Tial says will work at 8 PSI in a 60mm gate. So I was a little bit confused at first, but then I quickly did some math and realized that, well, of course, the boost pressure rating is going to vary depending on what size wastegate the spring is sitting on top of. So I looked on Tial's website at the different sizes of gates, and their large and small springs will both work in just about every size of wastegate that they have. And they have everything from a 35, a 40, I think a 50, and a 60mm wastegate. So there's 4 different sizes. And as the size of that valve increases, you know, there's a lot more surface area, with a 60mm being the largest. Well, there's a lot more force that's going to be generated against the spring by the boost pressure. So I double checked, and yes, the large green spring is in fact rated at 8.5 PSI with a 60mm wastegate. So we're good to go there. I double checked it. It fits nicely in the pocket. Dimensionally, it's the same exact size as the mystery pressure spring that actually came in the VS Racing gate. And if in the future I ever want to raise my boost pressure, Tial says you can just add the 2 pressures together. So this one is at 5, this one is at about 8, and then put the 2 together, so there's 13 PSI worth of spring there. Or if I put this one and this one together, according to the internet, that's 30 PSI. So this will probably be my final combination whenever I get my built motor in, because I think it's going to take about 14 PSI or 1 atmosphere to produce 1,000 horsepower, because roughly 1 bar or 1 extra atmosphere will double your NA horsepower. And if I can make 500 horses NA on an 8.1, which shouldn't be a problem because we're going to have better heads, better cam, more compression, and more cubic inches, roughly 1 bar of atmosphere should double that in theory. So anyway, right now we're going to be running at 8.5 PSI, and in the future I'll be able to raise it to about 13 or 14, and then of course the boost controller is on top of that. Real quick, because it's apart, you can easily see how the air pressure and the diaphragm works on a wastegate. The spring sits on top of the valve and it works to keep it closed. But then when you feed boost pressure into the bottom from the compressor cover, that actually works against the spring and tries to open the valve, and that makes your boost pressure a little bit lower. And that's normally how wastegate springs are rated, with a full manifold pressure going onto the bottom side of the gate. Now, if you want to raise boost pressure, you can either bleed that off, or you can pump in a little bit more air pressure on the top, or a combination of the two, especially if you're using like CO2 and a really sophisticated controller. But Anyway, this is the spring we're going to be running now, about 8.5 psi. So let's get this pushed back in. And now with these big springs, you can easily see why I prefer to do this outside of the truck, because it's kind of difficult to get that cover pushed down enough to get the bolts lined up. And these are a pretty precise fit. So I always use either an arbor press or a hydraulic press. Just don't obviously smash it, but it'll make your life a whole lot easier when it comes to installing a spring in a wastegate. Alrighty, so with the new stiffer spring in the wastegate, the first thing that you're going to want to do is hit the road, put your foot to the floor, and see how fast your vehicle is. Well, actually, no, don't do that. That's like the last thing that you're going to want to do, because we need to make sure that the vehicle's running in a safe area. First of all, we need to make sure that our boost pressure is going to be what we expect it to. And so I have an 8-pound spring in. I did turn my wastegate all the way down, so it shouldn't be any higher than that. And of course, that 8-pound rating is going to be somewhat dependent upon things like elevation, the design of your manifold, exhaust back pressure, and a few other variables. But we're going to shoot for somewhere around 8 psi, and then once I'm satisfied that it will hold there, which it should, I'll turn it up to maybe like 10 or 11 psi. But from there, we're going to want to make sure that the engine is still running safely, and we need to collect some data from the computer. So I've got my laptop hooked up. I'm using HP tuners, but there's a dozen different data loggers you can use. But the main thing that I'm going to be checking is, let's see, we've got, which one am I looking for? Air fuel error right here. I'm going to be logging the wideband against my commanded air fuel ratio to make sure it's not too rich or too lean at those new areas of the map. And then finally, the next most important thing I'm going to be looking at is spark retard. Again, we're looking at grams per cylinder here versus RPM. And I just want to make sure that it's not picking up a lot of knock. Now, it has, even before, shown me a couple of degrees every now and then. It's not really consistent. It might be every fourth pull. And I've kind of come to the conclusion, I think it's false knock, and I haven't played with the knock sensors a whole lot. But I do know I've put like 105 octane in there, and it's still shown knocking, even at like 10.5 degrees of timing, which is ultra conservative, and I'm running like 10.5 to 1 air fuel. So I don't believe it's actually knocking, although the knock sensor does pick it up. I haven't dialed in the knock sensor sensitivity yet, or raised that threshold, just because I want to at least know what the sensors are saying. I could make it ignore the knock sensors, but that's a whole nother story. Basically, the point of what I'm doing is just recording some data, making sure that the air fuel mixture is where I set it at, and also making sure the spark isn't doing anything too crazy. So let's hit the road. All right, so we're hitting the road. I just topped off with some fresh 91. That's actually the best fuel I can get in the area. I wish I had 93 octane, but for now, 91 is what we're working with. Hopefully it shouldn't be a problem with 8 to 10 PSI on fairly conservative timing. I've got the truck warmed up. I just drove to the gas station. Now we're kind of headed towards some of the back roads that we have around here. And the first thing that I'm going to do is just give it kind of an easy hit, you know, just to kind of make sure that the boost isn't going to dramatically spike. Because that's like the first thing we want to make sure is, are we hitting our target boost more or less? I've got another camera here for you guys. We got boost on the bottom, we got fuel pressure in the middle, and we got the wideband up top. I think you can see all of them, but the one that I'm going to be shooting for right here is boost. Don't know if you can see it or not. 5 pounds is there, 10 pounds is kind of there. So hopefully the needle stays a little bit less than 10, and we can turn the boost controller up from there. So here we go. Okay, so that was about 9 PSI of boost, which is approximately what it's supposed to do, and I noticed it kind of leveled off, which means the wastegate has opened up and it's doing what it should. So I need to just quickly glance down at the data logger there, and I noticed no knock retard, so we're doing good there. I need to do it again because I didn't get a good chance to watch the wideband, although the data logger did record it. So I think the next thing what I'm gonna do is slow down a little bit and do a little bit stronger pull through a few more gears, because like I said, we're at like 9 PSI now, which is 2 PSI more than I've ever run in this thing. So we'll give it a go. Climbs a little bit to 10 PSI once we get to third gear, because you got a little bit more load, but still boost is fairly steady. So now what I need to do, because that was a pretty good full throttle pull, I need to read the data to make sure that everything is more or less safe. So let me pull over and see what it looks like. All right, so I've got the log pulled up and I'm looking at it real quick. So far it seems like we're doing pretty good. Remember, I'm on the very, very conservative side of things for both air-fuel ratio and for timing. First thing that I'm looking for is knock. It did pick up a little bit of knock retard right after it looks like the 2-3 shift. But it's kind of weird because it's always done that, so that's not doing anything that's out of the ordinary for this setup, and I don't think it's actual knock. It might be, I mean, I am logging burst knock and torque management retard, and neither of those pull up, but it is just odd to me that it always shows knock retard immediately after a shift. So it's pulling like a degree, not a huge deal. Like I said, it's always done that. So the next thing I'm going to check real quick is our air-fuel ratio error. And let's see. It's actually, according to this, it's a little bit on the rich side. It's pulling 4 and 7% in 2 different cells. Other than that, it's pretty spot on. There's a few areas that I probably need to dial in kind of in partial throttle. But so far so good, 10 PSI boost. I think we're gonna do okay. The other thing that we need to kind of mention is today it's like 100 degrees outside. I also have no air conditioning in the truck, but that's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about the inlet air temperatures. So speaking of which, let me look real quick. At the end of that pull, actually, that's really not bad at all. At the end of that pull, we only had 106 degrees on the IATs. So all in all, that's not bad considering how hot it is outside. We're only like 6 degrees above ambient. So 10 PSI boost works out pretty good. I'm gonna go make another run just to collect more data and, of course, have a little bit of fun. Good roll on here and see how she does. you probably shouldn't do what I just did there. I mean, you probably should take baby steps when you're tuning a setup on a little bit higher boost level. But she's loving it. Wideband's just fine. I'll go check the spark on that one, but I think we're going to be good. So it definitely seems a little bit quicker. I mean, more boost obviously equals more power, although going from 7 to 10 psi isn't a huge bump. It's definitely a step in the right direction. Okay, I just couldn't resist. I went ahead and put 2 turns on the boost controller because I just looked at the last log. Super clean, practically 0 knock. The air fuels look like they're doing exactly what they need to be. So let's see what 2 turns will do. This is usually where you get in trouble with a turbo setup, is just kind of pushing your luck, but why not, right? Okay, let's see. Make sure we are recording. We are. Here goes nothing, guys. Alright, there's 5. Maybe 11. Oops, spinning a lot more. Still a rock solid 10. Maybe I saw 11 just a little bit here and there. I don't know. I don't want to push my luck too much further because that's where you do get in trouble. But it's a lot of fun. And it definitely hadn't spun the tires quite that bad before, so we're getting into the area where this is going to be a quick truck. So the last thing I'll mention, which I haven't really talked about on video so far, is I don't know how good the microphones are on these cameras, but you maybe can hear just a little bit of a squeak. And I know you definitely could hear it in the last video when I did the 2-step, just kind of more of like a chirping sound. I think I have a little bit of an exhaust leak. And I went ahead in the middle of this video and I actually tightened up all the manifold bolts because they were just a little bit loose. And I can still hear it just a tiny bit, and I don't know if the cameras will pick up on it or not. But whenever you're pushing your turbo harder, you're going to be putting more drive pressure in the exhaust, which is going to make any leak you have worse. So I think I'm ultimately going to have to take the manifolds off and put some new gaskets in there because I checked everything and it is tight. But the only reason I haven't done that yet is just because on the driver's side I never had that manifold off the motor, and those bolts are like really rusty, so I'm afraid I'll break one. So I'm going to try to limp it along without blowing out the gasket too badly, but that's just something to keep in mind, is every time you raise the boost pressure, you're also raising the pressure inside the exhaust. Alright, I know I said I wasn't going to do it, but we're doing 2 more turns. We get like 11 pounds. Alright, there's actually 3, so 5 turns in total. I have no idea what that's going to do to the boost level, but that 8.1 is holding on because this might get spicy. And then we're done, I promise. About 12 on the surge on the shift. Okay, yeah, that's definitely enough. Ooh, got some smoke on D-cell there. Yeah, we're definitely putting a lot more pressure into this engine than it's ever had. I think I saw a maximum of about 13 psi when you get to a little bit higher gears. So, let me look at the log real quick. I'll give you guys a final report and then we'll be done, I promise. All right, so we're back in the shop, and I just wanted to kind of wrap things up here and go over one of the last data logs that I took. Now, when I started out making this video, I had no intention to run this thing up to 13 psi boost, but it just happened, and actually the data shows me that everything should be a-okay. Although, the one thing I can't vouch for is how long the 8.1 is going to live at that boost level, but I am taking all the necessary steps to make this thing as conservative as possible to hopefully let it live a very long and happy life. even at 13 pounds of boost. But you never know. Like I said, the 8.1 is sort of kind of untested in scenarios like what we're doing here. Remember, bone stock short block, I haven't even opened up the ring gap. So let's take a look at one of my very last logs. I've done a total of about 5 pulls on that boost level. And so here's the data. The first thing that I'm looking at is down here on this table, spark retard. Now I do have it limited right here to only show the data in this zoom range right here. And I'll show you guys in a second why I'm doing that, because it is a little bit inconsistent where it picks up knock. But this pull right here, as you can see, if you watch the miles per hour, I think this kind of glitched out. I don't know, I don't remember going that fast, but if you look at this pull, I went full throttle at 58 miles an hour or thereabouts. And for some reason, the speed sensor, I think, was messing up because it showed a number a little bit higher than I was actually going. But look down here, this is knock. It's picking up in this spot right here of the table. 0 knock at all, which is just awesome, because when you're putting, higher loads on a turbo engine, that's generally where you're going to see knock. So the second thing that I'll look at is, let's see, spark advance. This will show you how much timing I was running, only about 11 degrees. Although I don't know why it spikes up to 17 at 5,200 RPMs. I'll check that out. But for the most part, while I'm in it, about 11 to 12 degrees. And actually, I think now that I'm thinking of it, that 17 is probably right when I lifted off the throttle right here. It kind of advanced the timing. Yeah, that's, I think, what happened. So really conservative. My buddy Pat Topolinski, he says, well, I actually can't tell you exactly what he said, but he said, don't be such a chicken, put some more timing in that thing. So I think in a future video, I'll definitely do that. The next thing that we're going to check out is air-fuel ratio, because this is the big unknown at the moment, because I'm operating in a range of the fuel tables, which I've never done before. I've never collected data. It's just I took my last row, I think I operated at like 140 kPa, whereas now we're at 165 kPa. And I just kind of interpolated it down. So this table here I have set up to read my wideband sensor and compare it to the expected air-fuel ratio. And as you can see, there's some mid-range stuff I need to dial in a little bit further, because with that stiffer spring in the gate, it's going to spool up a little bit quicker in the mid-range. But the big numbers that I want to look at are down here. Let's see, we got 155, 165 kPa row. We've got +1, -0.4, -3, -6. And these negative values in here, basically that means it's actually pulling away fuel, or it's reading a little bit richer than I have commanded it to, which is a good thing. I can correct this, and these values ideally should be close to 0, but all it really means is that we're a little bit richer than we're telling the computer to run at, and we need to fine-tune the VE table. But I'm actually really happy with this right now. Like I said, I never intended to run at 13 pounds of boost, but that's the thing with the turbo, is it's just so easy to put another couple of turns on the boost controller. And I will say, on this hit I did right here, this was, so the first one I showed you here, this was kind of a roll on from, no, it was a downshift, but this one was a slow speed downshift where I just kind of nailed it. That turbo lights pretty darn quick once things get going. So it's going to be a fun truck. And then, once again, I'll check down here. Air fuel error looks pretty good, and the spark retard is almost non-existent. So in other words, I'm happy with how the 8.1 is running. It's doing what it's supposed to do, and from what I can tell, it should be pretty safe. And like I said, a lot of these steps you can use if you're trying to raise the boost on your vehicle. Just record some data and make sure you know what to expect. And I mean, you're always going to push the limits, I guess. Anytime you're trying to increase how much power something makes more than it was designed to, you're kind of running on borrowed time. But as long as you kind of keep an eye on things and don't ask too much of it, you should be okay. So time will tell how long the 8.1 is going to last at 13 pounds. But hey, 13 is a lucky number, so I'm feeling good about it. Now, I want to say thank you guys for watching. Do me a favor though, drop a comment down below. Let me know how long you think the 8.1's going to last. Click the like button and finally click the subscribe button. I got to say thank you guys for watching. I do appreciate it. Let's get to 100,000 subs by the end of next year. Or actually, no, not next year, this year, 2021. And I'll catch you in another couple of days, guys. Thanks for watching.